All right, so tech and Top Gun. First off, I like airplanes. I particularly like military aircraft. And of course, I like fighter jets because who doesn't like fighter jets? I think they're pretty cool. I'm not a huge fan of Tom Cruise, but that's okay because I'm not going to be talking about the movie Top Gun. I'm going to be talking instead about the actual Top Gun school in the Naval Air Station in Fallon, Nevada, which I have learned about mostly from the guy you're about to see, a retired Navy pilot and former Top Gun instructor named Vincent Aiello, who also happens to host the Fighter Pilot podcast, which if anyone here shares any of my interest in this stuff, I do recommend you check it out. So what does this have to do with tech? Well, to be honest, I don't really know. And I think making direct comparisons to abstract stuff like this can be a bit of a stretch. But if we generalize, it seems like there should be something that an aspiring elite tech company can stand to learn from an organization that's had to train the best of the best when they could not afford to fail. So let's start at the beginning. During Operation Rolling Thunder in Vietnam, both the US Air Force and the Navy saw poor performance in air-to-air engagements. And this was also the first major US conflict where air combat was less about shooting guns and more about launching missiles. Now, the Air Force wanted to blame the missile technology itself, but the Navy concluded that this was fundamentally a human problem. The advent of the air-to-air missile had brought with it an assumption that those close-in dogfights would no longer happen, and so certain air combat maneuvers were neglected during training. Or to put it another way, new technology had been widely adopted without sufficient training. And when I say it like that, I feel like it starts to be a little more relevant to what we do. Now, this also had the knock-on effect that all of the dogfighting experience from World War II and pilots in Korea was not being passed on to future generations of pilots. And to put that another way, institutional knowledge was being lost. So to counter this, the Navy put together the Fighter Weapons School in 1969, which would become known as Top Gun. They looked at all of their pilots throughout the fleet. They would select the best candidates and send them off for specialized training where they would learn from each other some advanced air combat maneuvers. And when they graduated, they would no longer be regular pilots, but they would have this fancy patch on their shoulder that said Fighter Weapons School. And that meant they were training officers. So they would be returned to the fleet and dispersed throughout different squadrons with the main focus of inspiring and training everyone around them with the knowledge they gained from Top Gun. And of course, not everybody went back to the fleet. Some of them had to stay on, and they would become the next class of instructors. And as instructors, they would spend a tour doing nothing but research and lecturing on a specific topic. So they would become the subject matter experts in their field. And this meant that these 20-something lieutenants would go back and go toe-to-toe with admirals and have to tell them new information that they needed in order to make good decisions. Now, the curriculum at Top Gun is extremely condensed. In just 9 weeks, students will attend 80 hours worth of lectures and fly 25 sorties against the instructors, many of which they will have to refly because they don't get it right the first time. And this dedication to perfection goes doubly for the instructors themselves. They are not allowed to give a new lecture to real students before going through, or without first going through a review process that is charmingly known as a murder board. Now, during a murder board, they have to give the presentation to all the other instructors, after which they will meticulously pick apart any mistake they made, anytime they said anytime they fidgeted with their hands or had to turn and peek to see what the slide said. And all of this is because they need to eliminate any distraction between the content of the lectures and the students who need to absorb the material. And they go so far to avoid distraction that the presentation will occasionally include a blank slide so that everyone's attention has to focus on the speaker and the words being said, and no one is trying to take down notes on the previous bullet points. So at the end of the day, what I learned from Top Gun is that when it mattered most and the Navy needed their pilots to be the absolute best, they did not, in fact, put together some macho competition where they pit everyone against each other and the best rises to the top. Instead, they built a school. And they founded it on some pretty universal values. They told everyone to stay humble, welcome criticism, and to share knowledge. Thank you.